Story number 1. Thermal scan. I arrived at the abandoned Kessler mining complex on a Tuesday morning in late September to conduct a routine environmental contamination assessment following reports of groundwater discoloration in nearby residential wells. The site had been inactive since 2011, and my assignment was to collect soil and water samples from 12 designated points across the property, document any visible contamination, and file a preliminary risk evaluation within 5 business days. The access road was overgrown but passable. I parked near the main gate at 08:30 and performed my standard equipment check. Everything functioned normally. The weather was overcast, temperature in the low 50s, no precipitation. I entered the complex on foot, carrying 2 field kits and my documentation tablet. Initial soil samples from the eastern perimeter showed expected heavy metal contamination, primarily lead and arsenic, consistent with historical mining operations in the region. Water samples from the retention pond displayed visible discoloration, a rust-orange tint indicating probable iron oxide presence. I worked methodically through my checklist, photographing each sample location and recording GPS coordinates. At the northwest sector near the old processing facility, my digital pH meters began malfunctioning. The first unit displayed a reading of 7.2, then cycled downward through 654, continuing to 0 before resetting. I tested the calibration solution. The meter functioned correctly. I returned to the sample site. The same cycling pattern occurred. I retrieved my backup unit from the vehicle. It produced identical results, the numbers descending in a steady rhythm, reaching 0 approximately every 45 seconds. I switched to analog litmus paper and continued documentation. The paper indicated a pH of approximately 6.8, unremarkable for the context. I noted the equipment failure in my log and proceeded to the lower access tunnels to collect samples from the groundwater source. The tunnel entrance was partially collapsed but navigable. I activated my headlamp and descended the concrete stairs. Standard procedure required atmospheric testing before entry into confined spaces. My gas detector showed normal oxygen levels, no presence of methane or hydrogen sulfide. I continued downward. Approximately 60 feet below ground level, I noticed an unusual temperature gradient. The air grew warmer as I descended, contrary to standard geothermal patterns for this region and depth. At the bottom of the stairs, the temperature was noticeably higher than the surface, perhaps 70 degrees. I documented this observation and moved into the main corridor of sublevel 2. The tunnel was wider than expected, reinforced with steel beams that showed minimal corrosion despite the facility's age. My footsteps echoed differently than they should have in a space this size. The sound seemed compressed, as though the walls were closer than they appeared. I located the groundwater access point at approximately 1100 hours. Standing water covered the floor of the chamber, perhaps 3 inches deep. I knelt to collect a sample and observed that the water's surface appeared as a flat black plane. My headlamp shone directly into it, but produced no reflection. I could not see the bottom, could not see my own shadow or the beam of light penetrating the surface. It simply absorbed everything. I attempted to measure the depth with my sampling rod. The rod descended 18 inches before meeting resistance. I withdrew it. The rod was dry. Standard procedure required immediate withdrawal and site quarantine for any observation that could not be readily explained through environmental factors. I stood and turned toward the exit. My radio, which had been silent but functional, now produced only a steady tone on all channels, a single unbroken note that did not change when I adjusted the frequency. My GPS unit showed my position as 300 feet above ground level, placing me somewhere in the open air above the facility. I returned to the stairwell using my entry route. The corridor terminated in a chamber identical to the one I had just left, with the same black water covering the floor. I backtracked and chose a different passage. It led to the same chamber. I tried 4 additional routes over the next hour. Each terminated in standing water that reflected nothing. I sat against the wall and reviewed my options. My vehicle would be noticed missing by the following morning at the latest, possibly sooner if the regional office attempted contact. I had sufficient water for 3 days, sufficient battery power for approximately 12 hours of continuous light. Continuing to navigate seemed counterproductive. I violated containment protocol by remaining in place rather than attempting to exit the potentially hazardous environment, reasoning that a stationary position would be easier to locate during a search operation. I rationed my emergency water supply and waited. The temperature remained constant. The radio continued its single tone. I documented my observations in my notebook as the tablet's GPS dependency rendered it unreliable for accurate logging. At approximately 1800 hours, the water began to drain. I stood and observed the process. The water level decreased steadily, flowing toward no visible outlet, simply diminishing until the floor was dry. This revealed a shaft in the center of the chamber, descending beyond the range of my light. The shaft was approximately 4 feet in diameter, lined with smooth concrete. I approached the edge and directed my headlamp downward. The beam faded into darkness without illuminating a bottom. From below, I heard sounds I documented as mechanical in nature, rhythmic and regular, inconsistent with abandoned infrastructure. The sounds were not identifiable as any specific equipment. They continued for approximately 20 minutes, then ceased. I moved away from the shaft and returned to the corridor. The passages now led to different locations. I navigated back toward the stairwell and found instead a maintenance ladder ascending through a vertical shaft. The ladder had not been present during my initial survey. I climbed. I emerged in the main office building rather than the tunnel entrance I had used to descend. The time was 2200 hours. My radio functioned normally. I contacted the regional office and reported that I had completed sample collection and was departing the site. I did not mention the previous 12 hours. I drove directly to the field office and secured my samples in the laboratory refrigerator. The samples were later logged as compromised due to chain of custody irregularities. My preliminary report noted equipment malfunctions and recommended against further site access pending structural evaluation. The Kessler mining complex was reclassified as structurally unsound and permanently sealed within 72 hours. I was reassigned to desktop assessment duties pending standard psychological evaluation, which I completed without incident. The case file was marked inactive and transferred to the regional archive. I have not been assigned field work since that date. Story number 2, Inventory Delta. I arrived at the Chouteau County Courthouse basement on the morning of November 4, 2023, to conduct the annual evidence audit required before the facility's scheduled closure and transfer to state archives. The assignment was routine. I had performed similar audits in 6 counties over the previous 18 months, and the paperwork indicated nothing unusual about this location beyond its age, and the volume of pre-digital records requiring manual verification. The evidence room occupied the eastern half of the basement, accessible through a reinforced door with a mechanical lock that required 2 keys held by separate county officials. The room itself measured approximately 30 feet by 40 feet, with metal shelving units arranged in 4 rows and a small intake desk positioned near the entrance. The air was dry and cool, maintained by a standalone climate control unit that had been installed sometime in the early 2000s. I noted the temperature at 62 degrees and the humidity at 38%, both within acceptable ranges for long-term storage. The evidence room contained approximately 240 items catalogued between 1978 and 2012, most consisting of routine property crime materials, traffic incident documentation, and sealed juvenile case files. I began the audit at 9:15 in the morning, working systematically from the first shelf position and photographing each item alongside its corresponding catalog entry. The process was methodical. I had completed audits of this type often enough that the work required minimal conscious attention. During the initial inventory check, I noted that item 73-89, logged as a cassette tape from a 1989 domestic disturbance call, was missing from its designated shelf position despite the seal tag remaining intact on the empty space. The tag showed no signs of tampering. The adhesive had yellowed uniformly, and the signature across the seal matched the faded ink style consistent with documents from that period. I documented the discrepancy with 3 photographs and made a note in my field tablet to conduct a secondary sweep before filing the report. I followed standard procedure and began a secondary sweep of all storage areas, discovering the cassette tape sitting on the evidence intake desk in the adjacent room, which had been locked since my arrival. The tape sat in the center of the desk surface, positioned as though someone had placed it there deliberately rather than dropped or misplaced it. The evidence bag was sealed and labeled correctly. I compared the item number to my catalog and confirmed it matched the missing entry. I photographed the tape in its current location, then returned it to shelf position 73-89 and resealed the area with a new tag bearing my initials and the current date. When I returned the tape to its proper location and resumed the audit, I found it back on the intake desk 11 minutes later, confirmed by comparing my photographs of both positions. The timestamp on my camera showed I had photographed the tape on the shelf at 10:37. When I entered the intake area at 10:48 to retrieve a box of evidence bags from the supply cabinet, the tape was once again centered on the desk. The seal I had applied 11 minutes earlier remained intact. I attempted to log the discrepancy through the county database system, but the entry for item 73-89 displayed no case number, no officer name, and a date field reading only 000. The description field contained a single line of text, audio recording, domestic disturbance, residence. No address was listed. I examined the bag carefully under the desk lamp and found no indication that it had been opened or transferred. No complainant or suspect information appeared in any of the associated fields. Following my training, I secured the tape in a temporary evidence locker and continued the audit. But over the next 4 hours, 6 additional items from the 1980s appeared on the intake desk despite the storage room remaining locked and under my continuous observation. The items included a hunting knife from an assault case, a manila envelope containing photographs from a suspected arson, a sealed glass vial with no visible contents, a child's plastic toy marked as evidence in a neglect investigation, a water damage notebook, and a small cardboard box labeled only with a date in 1987. I ran a search for other items logged in 1989 and found 12 entries, all complete with standard documentation. Item 73-89 was the only record showing data corruption. Each time I discovered an item on the desk, I checked the corresponding shelf position and found the seal tag intact and undisturbed. Each database entry showed the same corrupted data structure as the cassette tape. I contacted my regional supervisor at 1600 hours, but she instructed me to complete the audit without further documentation of the movement incidents and to flag all affected items for administrative review rather than archival transfer. She asked me 3 times if I had opened any of the evidence bags or containers. I confirmed that I had not. She told me to photograph each flagged item in its current location, then secure all flagged materials in the temporary locker and complete the standard audit report for the remaining inventory. She said someone from the state office would retrieve the flagged items within 72 hours, and that I should not include the movement incidents in my written report. I finished the audit at 1900 hours. The temporary locker contained 32 items by that time, all from cases dated between 1984 and 1991, all showing identical database corruption. I completed the paperwork, locked the facility, and returned both keys to the county clerk's office. I drove back to my hotel and wrote my preliminary notes, though I knew they would remain in my personal files rather than the official record. The final audit report listed 32 items requiring administrative review, all connected to cases with incomplete or corrupted database entries, and I was reassigned to standard evidence processing in Billings. Effective the following week, I received the reassignment notice by email on November 6th. The Chouteau County Evidence Facility was emptied and decommissioned on schedule, with flagged materials transferred to an undisclosed location, and I received written confirmation that no further audits of pre-digital evidence systems would be assigned to my caseload. The confirmation letter was dated November 14th and signed by someone whose name I did not recognize. I filed it with my other administrative correspondence and reported to my new assignment in Billings on November 20th. The Chouteau County audit was marked complete in the state system, and I have not been contacted regarding any follow-up questions or additional documentation. Story number 3, Cleanup Crew. I was assigned to conduct pre-demolition environmental assessment at the former Hillcrest Youth Facility in February of 2007. The Juvenile Detention Center had been closed since 1998, following a series of lawsuits related to their use of prolonged isolation on minors. My role was straightforward. I needed to document hazardous materials across 3 cell blocks before the county could move forward with demolition. The facility sat on 40 acres of wooded land, about 12 miles outside Poughkeepsie. The main structure was a single-story concrete building with barred windows and a flat roof that had begun to collapse in the northwest corner. I arrived on a Monday morning with standard assessment equipment, floor plans from the county archives, and a work order that estimated 5 to 7 days for complete documentation. I began with A block and B block, the general population wings. Both showed expected degradation. Asbestos insulation around old pipe fittings, lead paint in layers beneath newer coats, black mold in the shower facilities. I photographed, sampled, and logged everything according to protocol. By Wednesday afternoon, I had cleared both wings and moved to D block, which the floor plans identified as the administrative segregation unit. Isolation cells. The wing was smaller than the others. A single corridor with 9 cells, each approximately 6 feet by 8 feet. Solid doors with observation slots. No windows. The air smelled stale and slightly sweet, which I attributed to rodent activity in the walls. I started at cell 1 and worked methodically. Paint samples, air quality readings, checking for friable asbestos in the ceiling tiles. I was in cell 4 when my dosimeter alarm activated. The device registered 0.3 microsieverts, then 0.7, then dropped to background levels within seconds. I checked the calibration. I checked my position relative to any possible shielded sources. There was nothing. The facility had never housed medical equipment, no industrial radiography, no legitimate reason for any radiation source to be present. I documented the reading and moved to cell 5. The dosimeter spiked again. 0.9 microsieverts for approximately 4 seconds, then nothing. I sealed both cells with tape and posted contamination warnings, then exited D block entirely and called my supervisor. He instructed me to follow standard containment protocol and return with proper detection equipment. I drove back to the regional office, signed out a calibrated scintillation counter and a backup dosimeter, and returned to the facility at 8:20 that evening. I unlocked the main entrance with my assigned key. I walked directly to D block. The door I had secured with tape and a posted warning was standing open. I checked the tape. It was intact on the frame, but the door itself had been opened inward, stretching the tape until it separated. I examined the lock. No damage. No sign of forced entry. I was the only person with site access. The property was surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and the main gate had been locked when I arrived. I proceeded with the radiation survey. Both dosimeters read background levels only. I spent 90 minutes checking every surface in cells 4 and 5, then expanded to the entire D-block corridor. Nothing. I documented the open door in my field notes, but could not explain it. I resecured the wing and left. Thursday, I returned at 7 in the morning. The D-block entrance was open again. The lock was still functional. The door had simply been opened. I checked the other cell blocks, all secure. I returned to D-block and continued the assessment, moving through cells 6, 7, 8, and 9. No further radiation signatures. I completed sampling by mid-afternoon and locked the wing again, this time placing a small piece of tape across the door and frame in a location that would not be visible unless specifically examined. Friday morning, the tape was broken. The door was open. I began documenting each instance in a separate log that I did not include in my official reports. Over the next 3 days, I recorded 17 separate occurrences, always D-block, always cells 4 through 9, always doors I had personally secured. On Tuesday of the following week, I was collecting paint samples in cell 7. It was approximately 2 in the afternoon. I heard a sound from the wall behind me, a dull, rhythmic impact. Concrete against concrete. I stopped moving and listened. The sound continued. 3 impacts, then a pause of roughly 5 seconds, then 3 more impacts. The rhythm was consistent with patterns I had read in the facility's incident documentation. Self-harm behaviors. Inmates striking their heads against cell walls. The reports described it as a common occurrence in the isolation wing during the facility's final years of operation. I was alone in the cell. I checked the adjacent cells. Empty. I returned to cell 7 and the sound continued. I stood motionless and counted. 3 impacts. 5-second pause. 3 impacts. 5-second pause. This continued for 43 minutes while I remained in the cell with my audio recorder running. When I reviewed the recording later that evening, it contained only my breathing and the sound of my boots shifting on the concrete floor. No impacts, no rhythm, nothing. I completed my assessment of D-block the following day. I found elevated lead levels, asbestos in ceiling tiles, and evidence of biological contamination consistent with long-term abandonment. I certified the building as cleared for demolition and submitted my report to the county on Thursday. In my recommendations, I noted that D-block should be prioritized in the demolition sequence and suggested minimal personnel be present during that phase of work. The demolition contract was awarded in early March. I was not assigned to monitor the operation. I did not request to be. The facility was razed over 6 days. D-block was demolished on the first day. I received confirmation of completion via email. My formal assessment report contained no mention of the radiation anomalies or the acoustic phenomena. Neither could be verified through standard documentation procedures. Both had ceased entirely after my final site visit. The case file was closed and archived under routine pre-demolition assessment. No follow-up was requested or required.